Hello, everybody. It's Dr. David Janarius. I'm back to you with the Sunday edition of the After Hours Clinic podcast. And I wanted to do a follow-up on a short video I recorded yesterday. Yesterday, I recorded a video in my garden, and I talked about the role of non-exercise activity in weight loss. Basically, what I was saying in the video is you're going to actually burn more calories and achieve better weight loss, oftentimes doing non-exercise activity than designated exercise. And while I know that to be true, I thought it would be fun to run through a little thought experiment and kind of break down what I mean by the numbers. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to compare my day yesterday of gardening, which I only gardened. I didn't do any purposeful exercise yesterday. And I'm going to compare it to, a situation or scenario in which I had instead run 5 miles on the treadmill for exercise. And at the end, I'm gonna look at how many calories could I actually consume in a day and still lose weight. So I thought it'd be fun because it is fun when you actually see, or at least it's fun for me when I see the numbers. I hope this is fun for you. This may just be some nerd nonsense, but let's break it down. First thing I'm going to kind of check on the screen here is a diagram that talks about total energy expenditure. And let me just throw this on the screen. Okay. So this is a neat graph that kind of tells us what our total calorie burn is and how we break it down. So the lowest column here in the dark gray, it's labeled BMR or basal metabolic rate. That is the calories your body burns at baseline to keep the lights on, so to speak, to keep all your organ systems functioning such that you don't die, right? And this is determined largely by, your body mass, your age, and gender are going to be kind of the three biggest determinants of that. So as you can tell by looking at this graph, that's about 70% of your calories. Most of your calorie burn is actually just what your various organ systems need to be able to function. In the column right above that, there is this smaller column in a slightly lighter gray labeled NEAT, right? And NEAT, I didn't mean to move that around. NEAT stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or calories burned through non-exercise activity. As you can tell, just eyeballing this graph, that's going to be the second largest portion of your daily calorie burn. And as we talked about, one of the ones that's most variable, right? So if you work a job like you're a server may walk over 10 miles just in their daily job. They're going to have much higher levels of NEAT than someone who is in an office. But other things influence it too, like, do you fidget a lot? Do you get up from your desk and move around a lot? Are you constantly moving your hands when you talk to prove a point because you fear your words are not good enough? Yeah, you'll burn more calories that way. So that's the second component. Right above that is TEF. That stands for thermic effect of food. So digestion is not a passive process. If you don't believe me, go get a college biochemistry book and just look at how a packet of sugar goes from the gut and becomes ATP. It's just very complicated, very energy dependent, magical process. I'm not going to go into the details, but suffice to say, you do burn calories digesting your food, and you can game that to some extent by adding, foods that are more challenging to digest, particularly like high fiber foods, require more energy to digest. But yeah, that's going to be anywhere from, around 10% of your daily calorie burn. And right above that in the smallest column, labeled EAT, that's your exercise activity thermogenesis, or calories burned through dedicated exercise. So that's, us running on the treadmill. That is going to be, 5 to 10%. Obviously, it's going to vary. An Olympic athlete, for example, like a Michael Phelps type, that's probably going to be a much larger component of his total energy expenditure. But for most people, this is roughly what it looks like. Okay, so we can tell by looking at that, just by doing a quick eyeball of that chart, kind of speaks to that principle that you burn more calories through non-exercise activity than you do through exercise. But I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through the process of determining like how many calories did I burn doing gardening, and how would that compare if, for example, I had instead uh, focused on the treadmill and got my exercise that way. So I'm going to find a cool calculator that will help us answer this question. All right. This is a calorie calculator that helps us, get an estimate of how many calories we burned through activity. Now, I know the newer watches can do this, a lot in a lot more simple fashion. I haven't looked at how accurate they are. That's probably worthy of another topic. But I'm just going to do it the old school way and go online and do my best estimate. So let's look at this calculator and we'll start filling it in. All right, my weight. All right, we don't measure things in kgs because this is America. That is communism. So I'm 175 pounds roughly. I This is probably an underestimate, but I'll say I spent 4 hours out there. Now, when I select my activities, I'm going to go down here to lawn and garden, and it wants me to describe it. Now, this is where it gets a little challenging because when you're gardening, you're obviously doing multiple things. So it's hard, I wasn't just raking the lawn. I wasn't just fertilizing. I was doing many things. So what I'm gonna look for something that speaks to a more general kind of effort. So I'm going to pick gardening general moderate effort. This, if you look under here, it says it actually spells it out in METs, and I think that's actually I'm gonna pause this for a second and talk about what METs are real quick, just so you understand it, because I think it's worth understanding. Okay. Up here on the screen, this gives a summary of MET. So MET just stands for metabolic equivalent. It's how we estimate like the intensity of our activity. So up here, top right, they break it down by ranges. So 3 or less METs, these are light activities like, just a very slow walk or what they call light gardening. I think that would be like weeding. That kind of activity where you're not necessarily moving that much, you're making small movements. Moderate activities, this puts us in the 3 to 6 MET. This is where I think most likely my activity yesterday is. That is going to be things more like, digging, raking, collecting leaves, that kind of thing. And then vigorous activities, that's over 6 METs. That's going to be pushing more towards when you're actually doing, dedicated exercise. Let me get out of here and we're going to go back to our original table. I'm going to stop share here. So I think 3.8 is probably a little low. Yeah, let's say 4.3. I think that's a safe ballpark to estimate. So I was at about 4 METs for 4 hours. Let's calculate the calorie burn. So they estimate that I burned around 1,300 calories for even, let's round it up, 1,400 calories. And again, I think this is probably an underestimate because I was doing some, more intense work out there. I'll take you through my garden one day so you can see what it involves. But yeah, on that low estimate, I am burning around 1,400 calories. Now that we've done that, why don't we then switch this over to a treadmill run? Let's see if we can do that here. Up here, I have yet another calorie calculating website, and we're going to compare the roughly 1,400 calories I burned through gardening to an example of dedicated moderate to high intensity exercise. So I'm going to use running because I think running is one of the most efficient ways to burn calories. It's also one of the hardest in terms of, impact on joints and just general fatigue that you get from running. And in Florida, it can be brutal if you're trying to run outside. But yeah, so we're going to go to this calculator here and running. We're going to assume I'm running about 6 miles an hour because that's a 10-minute mile, right? And I'm going to go for about 5 miles and I weigh $1.75. I've already done this because it auto-populates. And we see here in that 5 miles, that I ran, that took me, I guess, 50 minutes because I'm running 10-minute miles. I burned about, close to 700 calories. So actually half of what I would have achieved through gardening. Now, the obvious is that we, are not necessarily going to have 4 hours to garden every day, right? It was clearly way more efficient to run and burn those calories because in 50 minutes I burned half of what I did in 4 hours. But there's a lot to that, right? One, not everyone loves doing that kind of activity, like running. It is, as we mentioned, it's physically challenging. It can be hard on joints and things like that. Can lead to injuries more commonly than you would get through kind of moderate sustained activity. And it's also, I was burning these calories while I was enjoying the activity I was doing and making my yard a better place. Now, we don't always have 4 hours to dedicate to yard work, but if we just kind of extrapolate and say if I did half of that, if I came home from work and spent 2 hours in the garden, I would still achieve roughly as much as I would by dedicated physical activity in the form of running on a treadmill. And, I think a lot of people will make that trade. And I don't want to disparage, obviously, moderate to high intensity exercise. That is crucial for improving your cardiovascular fitness, which is probably the biggest determinant of healthy longevity in adults in the US, right? But I think the point I'm making is for most of your days, you could probably get most of your light to moderate activity doing activities you enjoy, and instead reserve the moderate to high intensity activities for a couple days a week where you, instead of spending an hour on the treadmill, for example, spend 15 minutes or 20 minutes doing high intensity intervals. For example, a 1 minute sprint followed by a minute of walking. That will improve cardiovascular fitness while kind of saving times and not making it so onerous. And then once you're done with that, you can go in the garden and burn some extra calories, right? The last part of this, I just wanted to give you an example of numbers, what this means. Like if I spent 4 hours in the garden, how many calories can I then consume and still either maintain or potentially lose weight? So in order to do that, we do have to kind of break down the idea of our total energy expenditure, right? So in order to do that, I'll have to kind of get an idea of how many calories I'm burning for each of those components of calories expended. We talked about the basal metabolic rate, the non-exercise activity, the exercise activity, and the calories I burn consuming my food. So let's go online. Let's pull up a basal metabolic rate calculator. So here, we have our BMR calculator. I'm just going to go ahead and enter in my stats. Wish I was 25. I sometimes feel like I'm 25. I mostly act like I'm 25, but I am 45, unfortunately. I am going to give myself an extra inch here and say I'm 5'11". I think I was 5'11 when I was 18. I suspect I may be like 5'10 and a half now. I think I shrunk a little. And again, I weigh $175. And let's calculate this. So this estimates my basal metabolic rate to be about 1,700 calories. Let's add another 200 to that, just roughly, for a thermic effect of food. That again is going to be roughly 10% of our calorie expenditure. So just to give ourselves a rough number, we'll say based on resting and digesting, I'm burning about 1,900 calories. Again, I did not do any dedicated exercise, so I'm not going to add that. But what I would be doing to this number is I would be adding that 1,400 calories to the 1,900 calories through rest and digestion. And that's going to give us around 3,300 calories. That would be my total sort of calorie bank account for weight loss or weight maintenance. And, for weight loss, anything under that will achieve weight loss. Mostly we recommend about 500 calorie deficits to get that sort of slow, steady weight loss, that healthy weight loss we're looking for. So if you think about it, that's quite a number of calories, actually. I know I mentioned earlier that it is easy to eat that many calories. That's 3,300 calories total, right? That's quite a bit. That's quite a number of calories. And if we think about it, like, while of course, if we're eating very high density calorie foods, we could easily get that back. But if we're actively making the choices we would make during weight loss, which is to eat these kind of more, more whole foods that are less palatable, that require more digestion, more preparation, that kind of thing, that's actually quite a number of calories. Most people, I tell them, most adult males, or I tell them to aim for about 1,800 calories a day for their diet, because I understand that most people are going to underestimate how much they take in by at least 500 calories. But, if we're shooting for 1,800 kcal, if we get there, obviously we're in quite a bit of a calorie deficit. If I overestimate, I'm still in a deficit. If I decide to go a little nuts, I can still do so within reason and still maintain my weight. And in fact, I did go nuts after last night. We had pizza and like ice cream and all that good stuff. I did not do a good job of actually tracking my calories, but I think I'm okay today. Anyways, that was a kind of a long way around to prove a point that I was making in my video yesterday, that in fact, yes, you do burn more calories through non-exercise activity than you do in exercise, and it is a great way to achieve your weight loss goals without hating life. So I hope you guys found that entertaining. I hope you found it informative. I hope this was a lights on moment for some of you. And if not, please feel free to leave a comment on what I could have done better, or topics that you might want to see in the future. Any comments, any kind of so much of the work I do, honestly, these topics that I present are based on situations that have come up in my practice and have garnered my interest. I'd just love any kind of feedback you'd have. But if this wasn't your cup of tea, I will be back with another cup of tea shortly. I hope you guys have a great day and a great weekend.